Is it really all over so soon? All those months of speculation, that overcrowded field of candidates, the talk of an open convention, and then just 10 days after Joe Biden won his first primary in 3 runs for U.S. president, the 77-year-old former vice president can boast what arguably looks like a near insurmountable lead, drawing to the polls many who don't usually vote, and with all other rivals lining up behind the presumptive Democratic nominee, all except one. We'll ask why Bernie Sanders and his promise of wholesale change failed to convince voters he'd be the better candidate to face Donald Trump in the fall so far. The left-wing Vermont senator who is staying in the race despite failing to win in the key swing state of Michigan. What should he do, though? What about his loyal followers? If he chooses to leverage his support, certainly a signature issue has got to be health care. What with the current coronavirus outbreak exposing how underfunded public services are in the United States and the possible prospect of slowdowns and lockdowns like the one ordered in a New York City suburb of New Rochelle. Could the U.S. be tipping into recession? On that score, what will campaigning look like in times of coronavirus? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if it's already over for the Democratic primaries. Joining us, attorney Joe Smallhover, of Democrats Abroad. How are you?
Good evening.
Thanks for being with us. I want to thank as well Bernie Sanders campaigner Andrew Lombardi, who's with us. Welcome
Thank you.
To the show. From Washington, Gabe Bai, who's professor of health policy at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
And from Utica, New York, pollster John Zogby, senior analyst at Zogby Strategies. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won Michigan and Missouri. This time, both of those states went to Biden. And even though the latter didn't stage a single rally in Washington state, he's running neck and neck with Sanders there, the former vice president, who spoke late Tuesday from his campaign headquarters in Philadelphia to reach out to Sanders supporters.
On Sunday, I very much look forward to the debate in Arizona with my friend Joe Biden. Donald Trump must be defeated, and I will do everything in my power to make that happen. On Sunday night, in the first one-on-one.
All right, that was Bernie Sanders. We'll talk about him more in a moment. Yeah, Joe Biden reaching out to Sanders supporters.
It's more than a comeback, in my view, our campaign. It's a comeback for the soul of this nation. And I want to thank Bernie Sanders and his supporters for their tireless energy and their passion. We share a common goal. And together, we'll defeat Donald Trump. We'll defeat him together.
Angela Lombardi, when you hear Joe Biden reaching out to supporters like yourself, what's your answer?
Well, it's strange. It sounds like he thinks that he heard a concession speech from Bernie Sanders, but there's no concession speech yet. The campaign continues. You may have heard we have a debate on Sunday, which every Bernie supporter in the world is looking forward to, because we can't wait to see how Joe Biden holds his own, or tries to at least, with Bernie Sanders for 2 hours. He's been able to hide on the campaign stage among 7-8 other candidates so far, but that's going to change. And Bernie Sanders, regardless of the results so far, has been winning the policy primary, and he's changed the conversation single-handedly. So I look forward to that. And regardless of what it changes, I think it's important to have that debate on Sunday and keep the conversation going. Just on my way here, I saw a Joe Biden first-person video on my Instagram feed, a sponsored advertisement asking me to contribute $5 to his campaign, probably trying to pick off Bernie Sanders supporters based on some smart algorithm that they have over there in his campaign. And my $5 are still going to Bernie until that campaign stops.
Joe Smallhover, is this good news or bad news that the race continues?
It's good news. It's what Democrats are supposed to do. Our rules specifically are designed to make the debate continue
until we have a clear candidate. If you compare the Democratic Party rules and the Republican Party rules, for instance, in the Republican Party, many of the states are winner take all. You don't even have to have a majority. You just get a small minority, but enough to take the lead in those states, and you get the nomination. That's what happened in 2016 with the Republican candidates. The current president got a significant lead because he was getting small minority share of those states, and it put him ahead. Our policy is designed to make sure that the debate continues and that it goes on until well, maybe not all the way to the end, but until everyone has been heard and we have
You heard Andrew saying this is going to be a different debate because the other time you had lots of people on stage. This time it's going to be one-on-one. How's he going to do?
Well, I don't know. Maybe will Tulsi be there? I don't know.
I don't know.
Because it's not. There's Tulsi Gabbard is still in the race. Well, yes, it'll obviously be different because there'll be fewer people on stage, and we'll see how that works. It can also work to the advantage of one or the other candidate. Right? Debates are unusual things, and strange things happen. A lot of people think, for instance, that in 2016 in the Hillary Trump debate, when he was wandering around behind her, basically physically almost threatening her, being very imposing, that she should have turned around and said, go back and sit down. Would the debate have come out differently had she done that? We don't. No one knows, but we'll see what happens on the weekend, and then we have another big primary on the following Tuesday. Yeah,
big primary day indeed. It'll include the likes of Florida, Ohio, Arizona, and Illinois. What does your polling suggest, John Zogby, in terms of the fact that the race continues? Is that good or bad for the Democrats?
Well, what the polling shows is that Biden is favored strongly in all of those states. Down the line just a little bit in Wisconsin, very significant battleground state. Sanders still has a shot. What the polling shows, however, is that whatever the Biden leads may be, Sanders is still going to get a decent chunk of delegates and a decent representation at the Democratic National Convention, where the debate will ultimately end. And so what I'm hearing, however, is a very subtle change now that these two men are facing each other, each referring to the other as my good friend, as opposed to nominate this guy and it will be the end of the party and the end of the world. These two guys have been around a long time, and what they know is that when that progressive wing and that establishment wing of the Democratic Party are at war with each other, their nominee is doomed. And it's happened several times over the last 50 years. I think they're both smart enough to know that they need each other.
And nobody wants to be blamed for dividing the party.
That is absolutely correct, and that's what would happen to Sanders. On the other hand, this is not done yet. Bernie is going to get a lot more delegates. But what we do know is that Biden absolutely unequivocally needs Sanders' base, especially among young people. He can't win without that, and that is the element that's missing from the Biden winning coalition thus far.
Jay Bai, when you look at the platforms of the two candidates on signature issues, including health care, how different are they?
They are very different. In fact, this ongoing primary gives American voters a great opportunity to learn what these candidates are thinking about the future landscape of American healthcare, and then give them opportunities to think independently, if possible, about what they want for their healthcare and for their children, grandchildren's healthcare. And these options proposed by these candidates are quite different. Survey after survey, American voters rank healthcare issues as their number one concern. So we have, on the one hand, Mr. Sanders have this Medicare for All platform. On the other hand, we have Mr. Biden, which has been consistent with the mainstream Democrats, have this public option platform. So they give voters to very different in surface and also in essence quite a contrasting approach to deal with the mounting healthcare spending in the United States.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about it specifically in the context of the coronavirus outbreak in a moment. But first, again, we look at the demographics of who voted and who turned out to the polls. Exit polls in Michigan are striking. More than race or religion, it is age that sets Biden and Sanders apart, with the young flocking to the progressive and the older to the more moderate, except, Andrew Lombardi, you have a problem. Mm-hmm. On Super Tuesday, that older electorate, which makes up 19% of potential voters, turned out to be 44% of those who cast ballots. The young don't vote. Why is that?
I can't argue with you there. I think, first, kudos and credits to the older generations who view voting as a reflex, because I wish 100% of Americans viewed it that way. My first job actually out of college was working for a civic engagement program that tried to register youth to vote and get them out to vote early, because it's a reflex. The earlier you start doing it, statistics show this, the earlier you get politically involved, the earlier you vote for the first time in your life, the more it continues for the rest of your life. But I would just say that Bernie Sanders has signed himself up for a difficult task. It's an honorable task, but younger people vote at a lower clip. Minorities vote at a lower clip. Blacks and Latinos vote at a lower clip. Immigrants vote at a lower clip than older, whiter, skewing demographics. So it's honorable, but it's difficult. And I don't think that it should be viewed as a failure, because I think he's made a lot of progress in these demographics that he's viewing as part of his coalition. But it's an uphill battle, and I think he's making progress there.
John Zogby, do the numbers show that when you compare to 2016 that there has been, as Andrew was saying, progress for Sanders?
Progress for Sanders, yes, but not progress for 18 to 40-year-olds turning out to vote. In fact, turnout this year is a slight uptick from 2016 among that age group, nowhere near what it was when Barack Obama was running. And that's why I'm hesitant to say that Bernie is a big loser, or that the members of the Democratic National Committee are suggesting let's end these primaries and end these debates, because in many ways, Bernie is a winner too in this process. Biden is winning considerably more delegates, but Bernie has a very important role to play in the party, and it will be played perhaps in terms of a running mate, in terms of a lot of Bernie's, not entirely, but a lot of Bernie's platform, simply because he at least has a better shot at delivering some of these younger voters than the establishment of the Democratic Party, led by Joe Biden, do right now.
And is it possible for there to be some kind of grand coalition heading into the general election?
There is, if Joe Biden all of a sudden starts trying to incorporate these younger voters into his coalition and starts passing. He needs to talk every day about the types of policies that Bernie Sanders is talking about that's getting him excited. Up until now, the only thing that people remember about Joe Biden so far is that he says he can beat Trump. I follow this race every day, all day for a year. Can't tell you one specific policy that Joe Biden is pushing besides trying to revert us back to the Obama years that got us Trump in the first place. So if he wants to bring that coalition in, first of all, John was perfectly correct. Joe Biden may win this primary. I'm not saying it's over, and it's definitely not over. But if he wins this primary, it's a whole other ballgame for him to bring in young people to win the general. If he does not do that, he will lose against Donald Trump. And he needs to make serious, not lip service, serious concessions there.
Joe Smolhofer, how does he bring in younger voters?
Well, you build the coalitions. Politics is compromise. and we've done it before. We can do it again. Barack Obama is an absolutely perfect example of someone who built an extraordinary coalition. Biden is doing that now.
How do you do it concretely?
You come down to when the debate on the platform. You come in and compromise votes on particular questions with respect to the platform. You make sure that the policies that the government is going to put forward, if a Biden presidency wins, are those which will also be supported by the young people. You can't. America is there. I mean, with 350 million people across a vast stretch with all kinds of different issues, depending where you are locally, there is no one issue in any age group that is absolutely going to win every vote in that group. So you have to build the coalition. The one thing I can say is that though there are differences between the various groups in the Democratic Party, they are generally united when you compare them to the views of the Republican Party. We talk about health care. Now, there are differences as to how they want to solve that, but the Republicans aren't talking about health care. They don't want a health care. They don't want the kind of policies, whether it's a single payer system or a kind of public option system. They don't want that at all. And that's not what we think the American people want.
All right, but let me ask the question differently then. How does Joe Biden avoid the Bernie or bust kind of feel we saw at the Democratic convention in 2016 against Hillary Clinton?
Maybe Mr. Sanders needs to help build the coalition as well.
He did that in
2016. Yeah, I was at the convention in 2016. Part of the Bernie people came out and supported the candidate, and then some of them left the convention.
The problem is we live in a democracy and people have free will. So Bernie Sanders can go around campaigning. He did over 40 events for Hillary Clinton. He publicly supported her at the convention. Doesn't mean people are going to get excited about a candidate trying to bring them in at the last second out of desperation to win, like somebody who has been consistent on the issues for 40 years that has built up their support. The thing that concerns me about this race and why I don't think it's anywhere near over is because, like I said, Biden can win. Biden can skate by in the skin of his teeth to the Democratic nomination. He cannot win without young voters. The problem Biden has is that Obama convinced young voters that he was different and that things were going to change. And then, by and large, he did not deliver on that.
All right, let me ask John Zogby about this. Can Biden win without young voters?
Absolutely not. No, zero. How's that for definitive? And I'm listening to this conversation, and it underscores a very, very important point, and that is, even though I hear my good friend from Biden and my good friend from Bernie, it's not entirely certain that even if Bernie embraces Joe Biden in the end, that he's going to be able to deliver a lot of his supporters. His supporters, many of them are very intense and keep Bernie on the left. Not that Bernie is not going to be on the left, but are even stronger in tone and substance than Bernie on some issues. I'm hearing it in this conversation today. And so it's going to be a monumental task. Now, two people who can assist this process, Bernie and Joe have got to be together in the final analysis. But the one person who showed that he could, in fact, deliver young voters out in record numbers and get record percentages of those young voters was Barack Obama. And that's what what everyone is waiting for to see. When does he actually jump in? When does he campaign? And how, in fact, does he target younger voters? And I want to add Michelle Obama as well to the mix.
But a lot of those younger voters are disenchanted with the Obama record. And I cried when Obama, during his inauguration in 2009, my feelings have changed a lot in the whatever we are, 10, 11 years removed from that. And again, I'll emphasize that even if Bernie Sanders campaigned harder for Joe Biden than Joe Biden, it's not going to result in an automatic flop.
There are unexpecteds that we're going to see on the campaign trail. One of those, of course, is the coronavirus outbreak. Stay with us. We'll talk about it when we come back. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and the picture is becoming clearer in the race to the Democratic nomination for U.S. president. Well, with Joe Biden in the past 10 days, not only leapfrogging Bernie Sanders as the favorite, but seeming nearly, but not quite invincible at this point after Tuesday's primary results. We're talking about it with Andrew Lombardi, who is a Bernie Sanders supporter. Joe Smallhoover of Democrats Abroad is with us as well. Welcome back. Welcome back to Jay Bai, professor of health policy at Johns Hopkins University, who's with us from Washington, D.C. And from Utica, New York, John Zogby, senior analyst at Zogby Strategies. Both Biden and Sanders, by the way, canceling rallies they had planned in Cleveland, Ohio, Tuesday evening, ahead of the primary that's taking place there in a week's time. Sanders' campaign saying all future events would be decided on a case-by-case basis, while Biden called off a scheduled upcoming Florida stop. Jay Bai, in Seattle County, King County in Seattle, where they're still, by the way, counting ballots from Tuesday's primary. The health officer there expects large, serious COVID-19 outbreak in weeks. It's what's a presidential election campaign going to look like if there are outbreaks everywhere?
Yes, that's a great question. This actually creates a huge risk for the incumbent president. Now we have not only the medical risk, we have the economic risk. Now people are losing confidence. So it's really a bad way to say, but it creates opportunity for the Democrats, right, to take this advantage of the incumbent administration's any mistake. In fact, if the White House cannot flatten the curve for this outbreak quickly, then they might lose the White House.
And can the White House turn it around?
Well, that depends on two things. One is what they actually deliver. Second is what is people's expectation. As we can see now, in Asia, we have Taiwan, we have South Korea, and Singapore are delivering a very good response. But on the other hand, we see Italy struggling. So now people do get a sense that what can be done and what is the consequence could be. So I would say it's making the White House job harder and harder.
In a country like the U.S., where so much of the healthcare system is in the hands of the private sector, is it possible to have a strong, coordinated response?
It is very difficult as compared to a very strong state like in China. It is much harder to have a coordinated response from the states. But on the other hand, we do have a more potential from the private sector. For example, the R&D, research and development, and also the donation from the private sector to help the government together to combat this crisis.
All right, so we could be in a lockdown scenario in a lot of places. Well, there's one New York suburb, New Rochelle, which has already been designated a containment area with a cluster of outbreaks prompting the closure of schools, houses of worship, and large gathering places. The governor also announcing the National Guard was being sent in to deliver food to homes and to help with the cleaning of public spaces.
This is
it's surreal. I don't know what to say, you know. I don't know how much risk I'm at. I work for one of the establishments here.
Let me ask you a practical question, John Zogby. The primaries in New York are taking place in April. Your neighbors and friends that are Democrats, do you see them turning out to vote if there is a huge spread of coronavirus?
No, and there are a couple of factors at play here. Well, one is that if Biden continues to build up the number of delegates and to win a string of primaries, that in itself will dampen turnout. And then the coronavirus absolutely dampening turnout as well. That, to some degree, is a typical story in New York because New York is generally late among primaries. When it's the nomination is still competitive, then there's an increase in turnout. But I think in terms of just to segue into a question you didn't ask, I think there's no net gain for anyone from any quarantine or self quarantine, simply because I think this is just a change in our culture that we're witnessing, and that both sides are going to have to play by the same rules. So no net gain. Say for Joe Biden, I'm hearing some talk that, well, there'll be fewer opportunities for him to make gaffes or to slip and fall. No net loss for Donald Trump because everybody knows he gets energized from his big rallies. I think when push comes to shove, everybody is in the same boat on this one.
Donald Trump, who announced on Tuesday he'd have a rally in a week from Thursday in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Let me ask you, Joe Smallhoover, because listening to Jay Bai speaking, it's the whole question that's dominated U.S. politics for decades now, which is what is the role of government, and that is obviously something that's on voters' minds. How much of an issue is it going to be?
Well, I think it's going to be an enormous issue. It already is, and it just makes it even bigger. There are three aspects actually to the crisis. One is the public health aspect. Simply, this president cut the staffing at the Center for Disease Control massively. There are currently 700 empty positions that aren't filled. They cut the ties that the United States had with China on key research projects, specifically about this kind of epidemic, this kind of virus. They've rendered the federal government's ability to respond virtually hobbling it. So we're in a very significantly bad situation in terms of the science. And we know that the other party, at least some of its leaders, reject the very notion of science. Then we have a different problem, which is not the healthcare delivery problem, but the fact that if you're sick, because we don't have a federal policy that mandates sick leave, if you're sick and you don't have adequate health care, you have a choice of paying the rent or going to work and contaminating your colleagues. And most people are going to figure out, well, you know what, I got a little sniffle, I'll go to work because I've got to be able to pay the rent. That is going to come up as a major question. We have to have paid medical leave. It's going to be debated certainly in the general election. And then there's the issue of what approach we are going to take. Are we going to have a national health care policy of some kind, or are we going to leave it entirely up to the private sector? I think those three things, the coronavirus is going to bring out a major thing. And then the final thing is this going to be Trump's Hurricane Katrina? Is the response going to be so disastrous that it will color the rest of his presidency?
Well, we shall see. And why not in that case? Because we're sitting in Paris, and the Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All, it seems pretty standard for Europeans, that kind of proposal.
Absolutely. And I've had this discussion with lots of people. I was here last week, and Bernie Sanders would be pretty much viewed as a very much mainline. In fact, someone even said he would be center right in France, although I don't believe that for a second. But that he would be, the policies that Bernie Sanders, many of his policies are from a European context pretty much in line with the social network that we have already.
But if we're about to spend the coming months talking about how do you deal with coronavirus, how do you pay for people who are sick, isn't that going to be?
It's going to be part of the debate. It'll be a debate, but the real debate is not between the Democrats, because even though we have different. No, it's not.
It is.
We have slightly different points of view, but we have a point of view on the other side, which
you just explained the value of public health care and workforce rights. You would be a great Bernie Sanders surrogate, actually. That's what you sound like.
How do you know that I'm not? I'm required by party rules to be neutral, and I'm being neutral.
Sure. Well, then that means you can't be a surrogate. But your points are extremely valid, and I agree with the points, but I need to break it down into even more practical terms, right? If you're an Amazon worker, we've heard horror stories of people working in Amazon, employee died, and the coworkers are forced to keep working, people urinating themselves, defecating themselves because they're not allowed to take breaks or leave. if you're under that type of pressure and you're working in a right-to-work state where unions have been all but outlawed, and your choice is between losing your job or showing up to an Amazon factory where there's 500, 1,000, 2,000 other workers, you have to take public transport to get there. How many people is that infecting if you have coronavirus? This is an economic issue and it's a public health issue. On the public health side, if it costs, I don't have a citation in front of me, but I saw somewhere that if without health care, at any type of health care, it costs up to $3,000 to go get checked, uninsured.
$3,700.
What is it?
$3,700.
$3,700, $3,700, even worse. So what's that going to do for somebody working paycheck to paycheck, who's one paycheck missed away from losing their house, not feeding their kids?
Let me ask Jay Bai, is this a turning point, perhaps, for the way Americans perceive public health care? We remember how much of a heavy lift it was getting Obamacare passed.
Yes, this might be a turning point. I agree with the gentleman talking about how Democrats were on the liberal side, what people think about this. But I believe there are people on the other side, which is more conservative, take this opportunity as a calling for less government control and more involvement of the private sector in healthcare. For example, now we need the virus vaccine, and then the White House calling for academic medical centers as well as big pharmaceutical manufacturers to produce and develop those vaccines. So those organizations are not government controlled. And many people start asking, well, if the government is making every decision for healthcare, then is that possible for us to ever get the vaccine? So that is also a voice we must pay attention on the other side of the spectrum.
And I think that just to Jay Bai's point, that is the first play and the bread and butter play of the neoliberal playbook, right? There's a crisis and there's some sort of perceived failing, breakdown of the public realm. So we need to move the jurisdiction more and more and more to the private sector. I think that right now, like what she just discussed, the fact that there are people suggesting, this is a perfect role for pharmaceutical companies to solve, for private healthcare insurers to solve. Perfect opportunity to look at who those billion-dollar, trillion-dollar corporations are funding and which candidates in the presidential race they're investing in and who they don't want to be elected. I think that Bernie Sanders' message has finally come home and been brought into stark relief. The fact that the lack of a public health care infrastructure is leaving people like in a coronavirus Wild West, where they're fending for themselves and don't have the means to seek health care in many cases.
John Zogby, do you see a swing in public opinion on this?
Actually, no, and that's what's interesting. I was struck by the earlier comment about the coronavirus being Donald Trump's possible Katrina. And just however many, 15 years ago, Katrina was the hurricane, and Bush's non-response was devastating to his polling numbers and to the remainder of his administration. And yet, fresh new polling out just yesterday and now today indicate Donald Trump is actually leading in a couple of battleground states, is competitive in nationwide polling against both Sanders and Biden. And so what a difference in 15 years. I think we're almost frozen in place. In terms of Trump's job approval rating, there hasn't even been any change whatsoever. He's still at about 46%.
All right, so views are entrenched, it sounds like. Jay Bai?
Yes, that's actually extremely great point. For the Medicare for All public option, what we hear from many voters is people are not sure where the money comes from. Right, so this is not a zero-sum game. If we shrink the economy, then there will be less money going into healthcare. And then where's the money going to innovation? And that is a major concern. And second, I believe many American voters are worried about government overreach and government intervention in controlling every aspect of healthcare. I believe that is some major concern from many voters in this country.
Even when there's a coronavirus outbreak?
So as I mentioned earlier, yes, we have two sets of actions to do. One is more heavy-handed. Then we need government enforcement. On the other hand, we need the private sector to really play an important role to develop the vaccine and find the cure. And that is not something government can do.
Not something the government.
And should it be charged? Should people be charged, and only the people who can pay for it be able to access the vaccine?
So that's a great point. So what we are talking about this development is first make it available. If we do not have the vaccine or cure available, nobody will get it. So as we always say, right, it's equal. Should we redistribute the wealth, or should we redistribute the poverty? So many people believe in this country that the development should come first once we get the drug or the vaccine. Then we can talk about how we pay for it and how we can subsidize the people who are really in need. And then we have a more equal medical access.
Whereas here in Europe, it's public funding for the research that's going on. Europeans pooling together their resources as they race to try and find a cure. One final point, because we're running short on time, and that is, if it is Joe Biden the front runner, and you heard the quip earlier by John Zogby about him being gaffe prone, Republicans have been circulating on social media a video where you see Biden arguing the point with a Michigan auto worker who accused the candidate of trying to take away his gun.
How you intend on getting the union vote when there is a large portion of the union workers that are gun enthusiasts, and you are actively trying to diminish our Second Amendment right and take away our guns?
You're full of shit.
All right, thank you.
No, shush. Shush. I support the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. And from the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my sons hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapon. I'm not taking your gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
So when you were in Beto, when you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
It's a viral video.
It's a viral video like the other ones they're putting out there. They're simply a lie.
Your voice, you said that you're taking the guns.
Well,
he just clarified
it. Wait. Take your AR-14s.
Okay, this is not okay.
Hold on.
All right.
Hey, let's
Don't tell me anything, pal. I'm going to go outside.
There's a lot of guys.
What does he do in that video, first of all, Joe Small?
Well, in the time of the coronavirus, when you have a president himself who hasn't said that someone's full of shit, but he says it in every one of his rallies about everybody else, that kind of language, which was not acceptable 15 years ago, is now kind of more or less de rigueur. It's becoming de rigueur. Number one. Number two, I think he,
does
he's
that
like
diminish
anybody.
Joe Biden's stance, people just?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. He was standing up for a point of view, and it makes him, he was clearly saying exactly what he thought. So, would Bernie have said? Would Bernie have had the same thing? I don't know.
I think that this clip, and I saw it plenty yesterday and today, is typical cable news gotcha viral stuff that should have no impact on the policy discussion or the greater debate. I don't think it says anything one way or the other about. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. This says nothing about Joe Biden standing with unions. I think it's an out of context gotcha clip that is all smoke and no fire.
John Zogby, Joe Biden was a senator at the age of 30. Do Americans feel as though they already know him, or do they have to get acquainted?
No, I mean, get acquainted with him as a presidential nominee, sure, that always has to happen. But no, they know Joe. And frankly, look, he won Michigan by 16 points right after that. Joe is Joe. And that's kind of what's been expected of him for years. And frankly, I think you're going to see more of that, and I don't see it hurting him one bit, just like it didn't in Michigan yesterday.
And vis-a-vis Donald Trump's common man touch?
Well, Donald Trump has other problems with common touches, and so and apparently it didn't hurt him. So I think this is where we're at these days.
All right, many thanks, John Zogby. Thank you so much for joining us from Utica, New York. I want to thank Jay Bai for being with us from Washington, D.C., Joe Smallhoover, Andrew Lombardi. Stay with us, please. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emerald Maxwell.
Hello.
And yeah, we've been talking about campaigning in times of coronavirus.
Yes, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the coronavirus, if I can get this up and running. Because
That's the joys of live television.
That is the joys of live.
Is the mouse not working?
It seems a bit, no, it's kind of...
Tell you what if you put this piece of paper here? Will that... There you go.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. There we go.
You're in business.
So here we have this lovely map that has been, basically the World Health Organization has just officially declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And here, Johns Hopkins University are doing a...
Jay Bai's outfit.
Exactly, running tally of all of the cases. And there's been lots of reaction. Here we have Greta Thunberg urging to young people not to rally this weekend. There's obviously lots of climate change rallies as usual, and she's urging them to take it online rather than go out into the streets like in Paris. There's one planned for this weekend. She's certainly not the only one continuing to react to coronavirus on social media. Here we have a lot of Italians in lockdown Italy. They've been particularly busy. Lots of nurses posting selfies of their exhaustion and their bruised faces after 16-hour shifts. Here we have one who looks like she's collapsed from tiredness. And lots of people...
well, is this because you're wearing masks all day?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They've been bruised by well. So a lot of people reposting them and congratulating them, calling them heroes. Another video that's been going viral in Italy is this video posted by an actor who appeared in the mob series Gomorrah. In it, he pleads for help after being trapped with his sister's dead body for 36 hours while quarantined at his Naples home. In some of the videos, you can actually see his sister's body, dead body, visible in the background. And in it, he claims that the Italian authorities have abandoned us. Her body was eventually collected by a local funeral home after the video went viral, but the case highlights the challenges facing Italy amid the lockdown. On a lighter note, there's lots of memes have been proliferating as the virus continues to. And this website, for instance, offers users the chance to generate hand-washing infographics based on lyrics. And among the most popular...
Wait, so you enter... Hang on. You type in the song title.
Yes, I guess so. And it comes up with all the lyrics. But one of them is this theatre troupe, which have done it with lines from Lady Macbeth's speech, urging people to, as if they were washing the blood off their hands. And that one's gone particularly viral. And also, meanwhile, lots of countries like Egypt have been teaming up with local singers and dancers to write catchy tunes and produce viral videos that raise awareness about ways to stop the spread. And this is the latest one from Egypt. Yes, and before we go, I'd like to move on to reaction to Harvey Weinstein. He's obviously just got 23 years for rape and sexual assault. So here we have lots of people sort of saluting the reporters who helped expose his crimes by investigating the allegations against him. And amongst them is Ronan Farrow. And he tweeted in reaction, he said, "A lot of news underlines how hard it is to hold wealthy and connected people accountable. Today's shows the power of people who speak up from a position of far less power." But here in France, although a lot of people are celebrating it in America, they're still celebrating it here, but there's been much comparison drawn between the treatment of Weinstein in America and Roman Polanski in France, where, of course, the film director was awarded a Caesar Award this weekend.
The equivalent of the Oscars.
Exactly, even though he has been also accused of sexual assault. And here we have this cartoon sort of illustrating the point. As the judge pronounces him guilty, Weinstein complains, saying in France he would have got a Caesar. And the woman who started the Me Too equivalent hashtag Balance ton port in France made the similar point. She says, but she's more optimistic. She says something incredible is happening in the US. Weinstein got 23 years based on words and testimony and little physical evidence. Victims, we believe you. And she says, now is the time to wake up, France.
All right, many thanks for that, Emerald Maxwell. We'll have more on that later. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.